Hi, I'm Clara, and this is the Practice with Clara podcast, where we go into yoga philosophy and how it makes your life better. Subscribe to the podcast.
Welcome, everyone, to the Practice with Clara podcast. You're sitting with Stephanie.
And I'm Clara, and today we have a very special guest, Alex Mazerolle, aka Ali Maz, who is the creator of Girlvana and who was in my life for a long time and has now been on the road for the last, I think, 6 or 7 years. So it's really, really wonderful to have you, to see your beautiful face and to have you on the show. So thanks for coming.
Thank you for having me. It brings me so much joy to see your face and hear your voice.
So Ali created an amazing, Ali's done actually many things, but the one thing that I thought we would love you to talk about, because I want to know what's going on, is Girlvana, which is an amazing organization that brings yoga to teenage girls, and along with, I think, lots of other things. But the idea is to empower our next generation in order to be mindful and to be in touch so that they can move forward and spread change. So tell us about it.
Yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you in particular because Girlvana really, the idea had been brewing inside of me, but it wasn't fully realized until I did like one of those morning, what did you call them? Like these early morning. Yeah, morning intensives. We read the 4 Desires. We did our Rod Stryker work. And I was like, oh my gosh, I need to do this. And that was like the beginning was that. Like I have Clara to thank because I feel like that was, it was really came down to the place of like, who am I not to do this? So yeah, Girlvana was created, in that time, around 2010, it's almost a decade ago. And the intention really was for self-identified young women to feel seen and heard and connected through the avenue of yoga, meditation, and real conversation. So I really just wanted to bridge mindfulness for teens, but as it pertains to gender and sexuality and identity and consent and periods and all of these things that young people have to deal with. The coming of age is so confusing. And I felt like I could help. So that's where it began.
And so tell us a little bit about the journey, or tell our listeners about the journey. And then I want to hear like what's going on now.
Yeah, so that was, almost a decade ago, which is so wild. And it started with me just teaching yoga in high schools. Like I was just knocking down doors of principals and school counselors and anyone, former dance studios that I used to dance at. And then the idea of the retreat came to be, which was, I was already leading yoga retreats, but I thought, how cool would it be for this to be all teenage girls and have sort of like a summer camp meets yoga retreat experience? And so we did our first one that year, and it has grown, I guess, oh my gosh, in so many different ways. We've trained over 100 teachers globally to teach Girlvana. So you can find Girlvana in Scotland, you can find Girlvana in Switzerland, and it's all over Canada and the US. It has morphed into a book, which will be published by Penguin Random House next year, which is so crazy.
Exciting. So cool.
And also Lady Vana came from that too. The experience was like all these women in my life going, well, can I come to Girlvana? Like, how do I come cry and talk about my feelings and make art and crafts and learn about myself and just really share in this experience of what it is to be female identifying and growing up in the world and talking about body image and our relationship to food and our relationship to ourselves and the sisterhood. So things sort of span from there, but it's grown in such beautiful ways.
It's been an amazing journey to watch. It's awesome. It's been
Thank
really
you.
Cool. Mm-hmm.
Thank
Mm-hmm.
you.
And can you talk about what the offerings become in terms of the last 6 months?
Yeah. Yeah, different time. It's interesting because now we're looking at teenagers are Gen Z. This is like this new emerging generation that is so cool and also terrifying. Like they really have grown up and seen the world in a way that we never did with social
Mm-hmm.
media, and they have such a pulse on all things political. Um, and so young people are just on their it's just more second nature. It's more native to them to be online. And so yeah, so we started creating offerings, whether it was Zoom yoga classes for young people. We just wrapped this weekend a very ambitious digital summit for teens. So it was a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, all day event, yoga
Whoa.
meditation with keynote speakers. Yeah, I'm talking 8 hours a day. And
Ooh.
girls had breakout sessions and were able to talk about what's coming up. But we did work around, we had 2 young Gen Z Black women that are on the front lines of the BLM movement in New York speak about activism and getting girls involved in
Awesome.
voting, conversations around allyship, conversations around mental health, yoga practices, breathwork practices. And so, I think I underestimated how profound a digital offering could be, and how deep and vulnerable young people are willing to go. It like blows me out of the water every single time how hungry young people are to have real conversations.
Oh, yes. And what was your biggest takeaway from the experience for you?
Of this weekend?
Yeah, of this past weekend, of this online summit.
I think I often feel, and you both know this from being in experiences where people are sharing openly, is like as soon as you open up, people can go, oh yeah, I feel that way too. And when you hear
Mm-hmm.
that, you feel less alone. And I think this generation, like being in online school, not being able to see their friends, not knowing really what's normal, what's not in terms of their mental health, I think just being able to be open about that can just be so life changing for someone to go, you know what, I feel that way too.
Yes.
And I always say with Girlvana, people are like, well, what happens? I'm like, not, we're just listening and sharing. I'm not saying anything profound. I'm not doing anything different than maybe what they're hearing from their parents, but it's just the ability to validate a young person's experience.
Mm-hmm. And so important.
Yeah, so important.
So important.
That's such a great way to introduce our theme this week, which is community, the topic of community and conversation. And before we get into the questions with Claire and Allie, we like to ask 3 semi-random questions just to help our listeners get to know you. Okay.
Cool.
So the first one is, what's a belief that's holding you back?
Oh.
Ooh, we're going there. Yeah, great question. Well, I'm sure we'll get into it, but I just started a new job, a new gig. And I feel like my imposter syndrome is coming up a lot, just being in a new environment and around other really fantastic teachers. And so it's funny, I still, even though I'm 34 now, I still feel sometimes like, because I started teaching when I was 19. I sometimes, yeah, I just sometimes feel like I'm still like the youngest kid in the room, which I'm not. But I sometimes the belief is like, I don't have enough experience to be here, or what do I know? Yeah, that one is just pulled through my whole experience as a teacher and is coming up a lot for me right now.
What's a book or the book that provides you a philosophy of living? So almost like your Bible.
Ooh. Women Who Run with the Wolves has always been, I have referred to it as a Bible before, but just speaking to the experience of women being wild, and that there is just a moment for women to be in the world. And there is really that experience of drawing oneself in and really cultivating a relationship to yourself. And I just love, I love storytelling, and I love that it's really based on fairy tales, but really soaked in the female psyche. That book was really revolutionary for me.
Yeah, I think Clara recommended that in an intensive, for me at least. So love it. Full circle.
It's so good. Yeah.
What are 3 things you never leave your home without? And if you could list 3 physical items and also 3 abstract items.
That's a really good question. So, right now, 3 physical items. Have moved to San Francisco temporarily, and we drove from New York to San Francisco and made lots of stops. But in Sedona, in Arizona, I bought lots of crystals, and I have a big black tourmaline that is like in my purse for protection because I'm in a new city and a new space, and so I just feel like that. I like get to the studio and I'm like, massive crystal, cell phone. So it would be my tourmaline, my phone, obviously, and one more item. My wallet would be that. And things that are a bit more abstract. I feel like I'm not leaving home right now without feeling grounded. Like I really am taking my practice very seriously because I feel ungrounded with the move. So I feel like I don't leave to go somewhere until I have centered myself. That's a big one. What are 2 others that are sort of abstract? So not physical. Is that what we're talking? Yeah. So I feel like, a sense of grounding. I often phone my mom when I'm in my Uber. So I would say like a phone call with Lori. And and style.
Great answers.
I like my clothes.
Thank you for sharing. To open our conversation around community, I thought it would be beneficial for listeners to hear what each of you offers as your superpower to the communities that you are part of. And if you could connect it to a story or a moment when you've made your superpower known.
Ooh.
These are such great questions.
Steph bring us the good questions.
Yeah, Steph is not playing any games.
No, that's why we love her.
I feel like I have this answer. I think my superpower is definitely vulnerability. I think my ability to share openly very easily. My former business partner Gian used to call me very emotionally agile. I can kind of go from, signing people into the studio to being like, hey, when I had an eating disorder, it just feels like I can flow with that. And as it pertains to community, I'll speak to the Girlvana community. My ability to open up and share is, I think, a doorway for young people to then share. So that would sort of be a direct experience of when I am open and vulnerable, I create this space or a brave space for other people to be open and vulnerable. And that has, created a really strong community for me.
On the other side of the spectrum, I think that I create, or what I offer to my community is a very, how do I describe this? It's like this very dark, heavy drop-in. And so what I mean by that is when I'm teaching, I feel like, or when the teaching is really working, I go deep down into myself and kind of sit with the mud, let's say, and I teach from that space. And what I've seen come back to me when I'm in that space is that people go down into their own mud, and so there's like this dark, heavy. I don't even know how to describe it. It's like, I feel like we go deep into our dark caves and we're in our own caves, but together. So there's like this quiet, it's beautiful that you brought that up, Ali, because I feel like, yes, yours is like very out. And so it brings people out. And I feel like I bring people in, like where it's kind of heavy, and heavy in a good way, not in a bad way, but like heavy in their own space. So I feel like we go deep together, but it's not a verbal. It's never verbal. I feel like it's energetic. So
Yes,
So it's cool.
you do that.
And yes, you do
With
that.
just with you talking, I was like, I can just visualize like walking into like a warm room at Yaletown Yoga with like you just sitting on your
Yes.
mat in silence and me just being like, I don't know, like 21, just like going through my shit and just like sitting on my mat and just being so held by that like heaviness. It's like so what I needed when I just like felt like I was floating and so confused. Like you were so that for me.
This is wonderful because it goes so well with the quote I've pulled. I went through some of your Instagram posts, Allie, and pulled a quote from one of them that is just so elegantly linked to what you both shared. So I'll read the quote and then I'll ask the question. When I turn inward toward myself and become willing to hold whatever the hurt may be, I am healing. So my question is, if you can share something that you've healed within yourself, whatever that practice or process was, or whatever you were healing, how deep you want to go into sharing with our listeners, and then what that enabled you to do with the space you create for your community.
I think the first one that comes to mind, I'm like, which one do I choose? So many. My mother passed away 6 years ago, and quite suddenly. And I don't talk about it very often, but the experience of that grief was very dark and heavy, and I had to go. It was so interesting because it happened in 3 weeks. Like she was like, I was there, and 3 weeks later she was no longer there. And it took me about a year to process a lot of that. And how I had to process that is I actually had to shut down and like disappear for a while, which is not like me. Like there has only been one span of time that I didn't teach yoga full time in the, 18 years that I've been teaching. And this was the second time. So 4 months after my mother passed away, it all came to a head, my grief. And so I feel so blessed to work at yoga studios that I called them and said, this is what's happening. And they said, great, like you don't have to come in tomorrow, and you call us when you're ready to come back. And they're like, you just take your time with this. And so for 3 or 4 months, I didn't brush my teeth, barely showered. I did a lot of crying and a lot of like amazing work on my couch in terms of like soul work. And through that, I feel like the dark, heavy mud is even more enriched of what I'm laughing because I'm like, well, it added to what was already happening. But I think that it added a layer to not only my own self through that healing, but it also added a layer to my teaching. And I feel like my teaching, I wouldn't say it became serious, but it became quieter, even more quiet. And there was a rawness there that I hadn't had before. And I like, even just talking about it, I can feel that rawness, which is, I feel like one of the greatest gifts that grief has ever given me is this chord that I can literally stroke or touch at any given moment and really feel I'm tasting it, and so I'm trying to describe how the feel of rawness is so tangible. That's what it is. It has this. I can feel it in my whole body. I might come back, but that's what I got right now.
Just to build off that, Clara. Sorry, I just have one question on that. Then, in terms of having that happen, would you say that the way you contributed and created community shifted with that process, like the before and after effects of having gone through such a profound experience of grief?
The first thing that I think of, which doesn't answer your question, but I'm just going to share, is you don't realize you're part of a club until you're part of that club. You don't realize that there is a club out there of people who've lost their parents. And hopefully we all join that club, meaning that we outlive our parents. So all of a sudden you start to see and feel who's in the club, even without them necessarily saying it, which is a very interesting experience. I was sharing this with a friend of mine whose parent just recently passed away, of like, all of a sudden I would talk to people and they would talk to me and I'm like, oh, we're not talking about anything. And I'm like, oh, we're all part of this club. And so you realize how big this club is and that it just keeps getting bigger, hopefully, again, if we can all outlive our parents, which I think is our parents' dream. So I've joined a community that I didn't know existed until now. And through that, there is a grief community, a larger grief community that I feel like I can tap into and feel like I didn't feel before. And we all at some point go through some sort of grief of some sort, like it doesn't necessarily even mean to be a parent. So I feel like there is an automatic intimacy that I have with people that I didn't have before.
Wow. Thank you for sharing that. I did not see that direction, but great answer.
Yeah. Beautiful answer. My mom lost her mom at 20. And when she talks about the club, in a different way, but you just explained that so beautifully. And it's something that, I don't know. My dad was on death's doorstep and came back a few years ago and is healthy. So I've tasted that almost loss very quickly. But just seeing her experience and like the way you just explained that, I think that's like the power of my mother actually, is like her ability just to go there with someone. This is like a quick side story. When I was in grade 5, I really wanted this baby blue puffy vest from Gap Kids and it was sold out everywhere. And so this is such an Alex story. This is before the internet. And so my mom got on, like called the operator to ask like other Gap stores for this stupid puffy vest, and ended up on the phone with this woman, the operator, for like an hour about how her son was going through a heroin addiction. And I was like, only my mom can call the operator for a phone number and be on the call for another hour working with this woman's child's addiction.
Oh my gosh.
That's the ability to drop in.
That's amazing.
Yes. Go, Lori.
Go, Lori.
So, Ali, in terms of...
I guess my answer. So, Mike, what was the question? 6 years ago, I had a home invasion. I woke up to a man at the foot of my bed and was bear maced very badly, and wasn't dressed. And so just the way my body absorbed the bear mace, it was awful and very traumatic. And what's interesting about that is because I was 6 months into owning my own yoga studio, and at that point really already trying to hold it all together. And my reaction to it was really interesting. And it was, stuff like this doesn't happen to people like me. Or I have all these tools, I'm fine. I'm fine. And similar to Clara, that idea of like, it took a year to go, oh wait, oops, maybe I'm not fine. And what I learned in the first year of trying to cope with what I had experienced, and all of the ways I was trying to keep busy and trying to stay positive and telling everyone that I was okay, was a lot of work, because I also had a brand new yoga studio that I was trying to keep afloat. And so it took me a long time to actually let myself not be okay. And it's interesting because it's what I tell people all the time. It's okay to not be okay, but really wasn't giving myself the permission, like at all, at all. And so, yeah, similar in the sense to Clara of like, what does it actually look like to give space and permission to yourself to unravel and fall apart? And what was built back from the unraveling was such a stronger way of teaching, a stronger way of being. And as it pertains to community, is I actually let my community hold me. And I don't think I was willing to do that before. I wanted to just be everyone's everything. And when I let people help me, I learned how to receive, which was something I previously was not good at.
I hear you.
I feel like both of you had like some sort of intuitive insight into the questions I was going to ask. This again bleeds into my next question, which is, what's a lesson you've learned being with community that you don't think you would have ever learned alone?
I think that the first thing that comes to mind, I'm like, which, or yeah, I feel like so many images come in, but I think that the biggest gift that I've received being in community is how much deeper I've gotten to know myself in community. And that by, yeah, all kinds of communities, I think by quite simply showing up and being together, even if we're not necessarily having a direction, like even if it's just a get together of friends, you know, that kind of community versus like a yoga community or whatever, I feel like I get to know myself so much more by being around other people. And through that, I feel way more inspired by my own connection and then by what I see around me and like the amazingness that is in all of us, you know, like, so yeah. Connection to self and then like the inspiration of being with others. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I so agree with that. It's like, and I think the contrast right now, right, is being in quarantine and not, you know, being in community in the same way is like, I miss feeling reflected in others, you know, like when someone is sharing something beautiful or someone's joy or someone's sadness is like, just to have something to relate to is like really what community gives me is like, oh, I've been there, or I want to go there. You just have all these portals into, you know, the human experience. That for me is, yeah, there's so much learning and just witnessing. And I think something that my teachers, and absolutely Clara has given this to me, is like, just the only word I have for it is humanity. It's like we're all on our journeys, we're all trying to figure it out. No one has the answers. It removes the ego or any sort of worship, or, you know, it's just like we're all just figuring it out. And that's what community gives, and that's honestly what I feel like I'm missing. I just miss being with people in that way.
Yeah, I feel the exact same way. And it's what's so interesting, at least, is that I would be kind of quarantining right now because I'm a new mom anyway. Like I can't really leave the house for more than an hour because I got to get back for this nap, you know? And so I feel like it's an interesting, I don't know why I'm bringing this up because I'd be curious because you're in a new city. So I feel like you also are in it, like it's a new, you know, it's a new community that you're a part of or becoming a part of. That it feels even more stark that I don't have people to hug and touch and for me, pass my baby to. Like, I'm like, this baby should be touched by everybody, but I can't give this baby to anybody right now. So it's like this weird, it's so weird it's a weird time.
It's so weird.
And so I'm curious. I'm curious. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's totally that. And it's also the air quality is really poor here too. So it's not even that we can go out and be in nature. So it feels like we're really doubling down on being inside for multiple reasons now. And so I've just really been in that examination and exploration of like, where do you go when you can't go anywhere? Okay, here it is. So that's been a lot of my work. But yeah, I had one sort of, we've been COVID test, like doing some rapid tests for days where we have to be on set with other people. And those days I'm just like I feel like a little loser kid that's like, hey, cool, hey, how's it going? Like I'm just like, I'm just like so happy. Like so happy to be in people's presence. It's insane. Yeah.
So you're like, everyone's so interesting. Like, what do you have to tell me?
Which is such a contrast from when I did have a yoga studio and there were so many people. I would be hiding in the back storage room to get like 5 minutes to ground before teaching versus now it's just different.
Yeah.
So in terms of holding space and creating space when you come together, especially leading a retreat or a yoga class or a workshop and grounding and being that anchor, what are some of the key qualities of entering space as a community and then being the container for that kind of environment? And I'll share a learning that I had a couple of years ago. My definition of holding space used to be putting others' needs before my own. And it took like a lot of conversations with my therapist at the time to see that I had everything backwards. And I think part of it stems from being a nanny. And when you're with kids, you do put kids' needs before your own. But when we are adults, even with teens, right, you're autonomous and you need to take care of yourself. You're not necessarily babysitting everyone else's emotions. So that was a really big lesson for me to learn in terms of how I'm creating space, entering communities, and then, relating and working with others. So I'm curious if either of you have any lessons you've learned or stories around cultivating and holding space, leading others through your journey.
One of the ways I have defined holding space in the example of like a retreat, and I'll bring it into Girlvana because it's so sensitive of like all these young teens sitting in a circle sharing their deepest, darkest secrets with each other, is that holding space for me is like, or how I share it with everyone is you being in your body and breathing for yourself. So it's like you taking care of you first. And what is going to feel most supportive to the person sharing their big vulnerable thing or holding them is actually not running over and throwing tissues at them and trying to give them a hug. And it's actually staying in your body and breathing for yourself. And that's sort of how I've always gone about holding space, is like hold it in my own body. I don't need to jump out of my own experience to keep you safe. And I slip on that sometimes, my boundaries, like especially with young people, because I want to be like, oh, I know what that feels like. So yeah, that would be my definition, is making sure I'm in my own body and I'm breathing, like consciously breathing.
I love that, and setting the boundary that you're not gonna come into somebody else's space, whether that's physical or metaphysical, like starting to extend your own story or overstep.
Yeah. And that, I think that it's so interesting because in traditional senses, or even just with friends, or, when someone cries, it's like, oh, don't cry, or here's a tissue, or, oh, do you need a hug? And I think, especially with young girls, that's sort of the way people want to support. And I'm really firm in that, of just staying in my own body and letting this young person have their emotional experience without trying to coddle or stifle it, is like, I'll sit here as long as you need me to just be present for you to move through this. And also, when you ask that question, I have this memory of Clara, of her. Clara does this really well. And I don't know if you still do this, Clara, but you would come into the studio, you get yourself set up, you teach the class for 90 minutes, and then you'd be like, peace. And I was like, oh, I am struggling with those boundaries. And I just remember talking to you about that. And you said something to the effect of, I just held space for 90 minutes. Like, I was so available to you in that time, and you did your job. And I think that the boundaries get so confusing because people are so opened up, and then they're like, I'm getting a divorce and I'm whatever. And it's like, where to draw that line. And that's really stuck with me, is like, when I show up in this time duration, you have me, I am here. Beyond that, it's a personal, bye. But it's a personal decision of how available you wish to be.
Yes.
I'll say that I have more space for younger people, because I understand that they don't always have, a supportive parent or somewhere they can go. But when it comes to adults, I'm like, I did the thing. Bye.
Yeah.
And you really modeled that for me early on. And I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, I would say that all of my teachers were like that.
Yeah.
Like all of my teachers are very strong with their boundaries in terms of doing the work, and then they step back. And so I used to get a lot of slack from it, actually, from yoga studios, because they really wanted me to be around. And I would say that I essentially felt like I just gave myself for 90 minutes. Like, I really, like, when the teaching was working, as I like to call it, then I was raw. Like, I felt like I would give my soul to this class, in a way to hold space, not like in terms of giving my energy, like giving myself over, but like the energy over. And so when I would, by the time Shavasana would come, I would be exhausted. Like, I felt like, especially if we did a lot of work in the room, because I felt like there would be a lot of emotional work that we would do together that I didn't have. In order for me to go teach the 4 more yoga classes I had to teach that day, I was like, Mom, I gotta go reground and like eat some food and like take a minute and breathe some air and not hear about, all the things that are happening in your life. Because like Ali says, like, and it happens a lot, because at workshops, I do make myself more available, because we've been together for a longer period of time and I don't have to go anywhere. So I'm always happy to. And I'll tell you, like, how many times people come and tell, because they've opened up and things have shown up for them, and they want to share that experience with you, which is amazing and beautiful. But I always have to remember, when I'm teaching those workshops or when I'm on retreat, that I need to really, after that, take a lot of time for myself to like just holding space takes up a lot of energy, as Ali's saying. So it's like, you gotta take the time for yourself, or else, especially in my younger days, I was so depleted from the work, from being together. And so kind of coming back around to Ali, I think you said it beautifully, like, how we hold space is we actually connect to ourselves. And the way that I think about it is to, feel my own breath, but also to open my own heart to not only what I'm hearing, but to what it brings up in myself, because through the experience of listening and or witnessing, and the gift of this is that it brings up things, your own experiences, your own emotions, and to sit with that and not try to change what's happening out there or change what's happening in here, And I love that you said that. Like, one of the big things I feel like that I learned early on from my teachers is, like, when somebody is sharing, you don't go and give them Kleenex and rub their back and like, take them out of their experience. You sit there and you just be with them and you listen, and you just become a space for them to be able to unload something that, we all carry a burden that we need to, if we share it, it becomes lighter. And so, but not to change that, because I am a big doer. So when I was younger, it was like, doing, like going and rubbing their back and like doing all the things and telling them how they're going to be better. And this is going to, they're going to get past this and like, whatever. And then to learn from my teachers, like, sit and do nothing. And also part of it is being the discomfort of their experience, meaning of their suffering or whatever it is that's coming up, that we change nothing. We just sit and we be with it. I love that that was a beautiful way of describing it. So we don't change anything. We be together.
Yeah, because we're not here to fix. And I think that definitely in my earlier years of teaching, I mean, that's often why we get into teaching, because they're like, I want to help
Help
everyone.
everyone.
Everyone's going to be helped and I'm going to do it. So great. There's all these
Da, da, da,
problems. I'm going to
da.
solve them. And yeah, and have like big people pleasing tendencies. And so staying after class and, and just being so flimsy with my boundaries, was a recipe for full burnout, sickness. Like, my body was like, if you're not going to say it, I'll call it for you. We have the flu, or whatever that was. And
Yes.
it wasn't really until I was being held by my teacher. Like, I still don't, I mean, when I was in Vancouver, like hug her or touch her, like she's sitting on that couch. She's not moving for me. She's just bearing witness and letting me figure my shit out. And then I'm doing the work and she's just holding it versus, where I thought, especially working with young people, I was like, oh, I don't want you to feel that way. I want to protect you. And that's actually really not my job. And so that distinction really changed things for me. And that's when I really started seeing young people in particular change around me was what I stopped trying to fix. Yeah.
So in terms of coming together and sharing, if you could share, each of you, what you do in times where there's oversharing happening, because something I witnessed teaching, and this goes both ways, where you have the student who is way overstepping a boundary and sharing way too much that is uncomfortable for either just you or the group, or when you as a teacher have slipped and overshared. Because I know I have stories around that where you're so open and the class is vibing and it feels good. And then you're like, oh, I took that a little, maybe that went too far for me. Lesson learned. So if there's a memory you are comfortable bringing out to the public, and what your tactics are to kind of curtail the process for yourself, or what you do with students who kind of get on a tangent and it's uncomfortable after a time.
Yeah, it happens. It absolutely happens. And especially in like teacher training settings or retreat settings, especially when you're in a faraway destination and when there's more anonymity in the group and you're like, blah. And so I think that for me, and it happens obviously a lot with young people too, is I will say, thank you for sharing. And I will move on, because when you give it a little more life, then they are going to want to take that little inch and keep going. And I also don't want to feel dismissive either. Like, ooh, too much, Cheryl, like tone it down. It's really just a clear thank you for sharing that. Anyone else? Like just a transition where that person feels like it's validated, but it's not giving them a little more bait to keep going. That's, I think, what I do in that situation.
I've definitely had some times where I did not gracefully shift the energy, meaning that we had, an energy vampire in the room, and how they were taking energy is actually by telling so much or giving so much out. So that definitely was a lesson that I had. I can have a sharp tongue. I get that not only from my family, but also from my teachers. One of the reasons I can also love them is that they can be hard in their delivery, which can sometimes be a little intense. So I've had to learn how to shift that, because I don't think we don't need that kind of medicine most times. And I don't want to give that medicine most times. And so generally how I do it now is, I say thank you for sharing, and ask somebody else, or one thing that I've done now that I do now that I got from my friend Nico Luce is at the beginning of any retreat or training, we go through the 4 agreements by Ruiz, but I add a 5th agreement, and the 5th agreement is to be mindful of how much you are giving in terms of speaking and how much you are not speaking. And so because we are in a group and we always sit in a circle, to state that we're not in a hierarchy, is like, I want you to be aware of how much you're sharing with the group, because sometimes we're super enthusiastic and we just want to say all the things, which is amazing. And people who process maybe at a different pace don't have the opportunity to speak. So I may ask you at times to maybe not speak. And I'm saying it from a loving place to get other people to be able to share who maybe need a couple more minutes to be able to do that. So I bring up the 4 agreements, and then I say, and there's a 5th agreement. And so do we all agree to these agreements as a community? And so know that if and when I do say that to you, I'm saying it because I'm being mindful of the whole group. And I found that that's been a really great way to kind of set the tone at the beginning, because I've definitely had, like, especially in larger teacher trainings, where I have like 20 plus people and we're doing a sharing circle, and it's like one person's going for like that 15 minutes and you're like, cool. So we still have 15 more people that need to speak. So, and so another thing that I also learned is actually from Anna Forrest is to set a timer and be like, there's going to be a timer. And then when you hear that sound go off, you don't finish your thought, you finish your sentence, and we move on to the next person. And I really like that, because again, it states it at the beginning to be like, this isn't personal. It's not personal. It's just an understanding of honoring time.
Yeah, I love that. You finish your sentence, not your thought. Love that. That's big takeaway for me. Something we use is clarity, brevity, or clarity, transparency, brevity. And so it's just super clear. It's like, be transparent, be real, be really clear. You don't have to be like, this car accident in 1992. It's like, get to the point. And then brevity. And so when you state that really clearly in the beginning, often what will happen through a teacher training, people will be rambling off and they'll be like, oh, right, sorry, brevity. And so just, they'll hopefully sort of self-correct. But I definitely feel like laying those ground rules down are super important. But like clarity, transparency, brevity are the 3 that are sort of guiding in circle 2.
Yeah. And set that up. And I found that since I've started setting it up that way, I haven't had to maneuver that or work, let's say, massage that situation as much, because definitely, especially if I have an agenda to get through, like if it's a teacher training and I'm like, I've got curriculum to get through in this amount of time, that I'm like, if it doesn't have to do with the curriculum right now, I'm hearing what you're saying, let's shelf it. And if and when we come back to that topic, I'd love you to bring it up. But if it doesn't have to do with what's happening right now, I'm going to ask you to stop.
Yeah.
I love that. That's, I've had to do that, because if I used to, and then it would be like, we wouldn't get through all the, and I was like, people paid for, this content. I need to make sure I get through the content.
And it can really steal, and it can really steal people's experiences. Like there's nothing worse than being a student in that setting and someone's going on forever and ever. And you're like, oh, let's go. So it's like another sort of like, be mindful of the space that you're taking up, and and that self-awareness for sure.
Before I ask the final question, Clara, I would love to know what all of the agreements are that you set for the community.
So the 4 agreements, I think his last name is Ruiz. I think his first name is Carlos Ruiz.
Or Don.
Nope.
Don.
Oh yeah, you're right, Don. Yeah, Don Miguel.
Don?
It is. Good job.
It's our boy Don.
It's our boy Don. Well done. I was like, Ruiz is all I got. So 4 agreements are say what you mean what you say. Always go to the source is another one. I'm doing them out of order because I wasn't prepared to tell you them. So so go to the source, meaning that if you ever have a problem with anybody, you don't talk about it with other people. You go to the source and you talk to them about it. So say what you mean what you say, go to the source, do your best, meaning show up and do your best always. And whatever that means that day, it doesn't, it may look different every day because of depending how we feel. And we also honor that. And we assume that other people are doing their best. Mm-hmm. So you do your best. You assume that other people are doing the best, and that you, I had it, and then go ahead.
Don't take anything personally.
There you go. Yeah. Don't take anything personally.
I remember that one because I take everything personally always. So it's literally my number one.
You're like, they're talking to me. Yeah. So exactly. So we'll go through it again. Say what you mean what you say. Don't take things personally. Go to the source and do your best. And then I add in, be mindful, because we're in a group, of how much you contribute versus how much you're not contributing. And, for us to be as a group, because we as a collective can learn from each other. And so, step back if you notice that you're really stepping in a lot, and or step in if you've noticed that you've really stepped back. And so then that way we can, because we have the opportunity. Because if not, then sometimes, I don't know if I've been to trainings where it's like 3 people talking the whole time, and you're like, there's 20 people here. Like, let's, there's so much more knowledge in this room that we could be sharing instead of, the 3 people. So yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
So my last question is around being an active listener. And the reason I'm asking this, I'm in some online courses and I tried giving the teacher feedback on how exactly what the 5 agreements are and how people are participating and listening and being called upon. And the teacher was not having it. Like last night, I was like, all right, cool. Thank you very much. Namaste. Going to leave this alone. Write a very long letter to Berkeley at the end when they ask me for feedback. And what I'm noticing is that in the group, I think there's like 15 or 16 of us, I'm not seeing that people know how to listen. Like it's not, listening is a skill. And I think there's a number of things that go into what being a good listener is and how it's presented and how you can demonstrate to be a good listener, which is what I'm trying to do in the breakout rooms we have. So I'm just curious as to if you've had moments with students where you're like, oh, this person does not know how to listen. And if there was a learning opportunity, or if you yourself, what you try to embody and demonstrate in terms of active listening.
It's such a misleading term, active listening, because I think the greatest listeners are actually, for me, when I'm a good listener, I'm actually not being active, meaning because especially if the topic is exciting and or I want to fix it or whatever, like I'm already going through all of these things in my mind, and that's what I'm actively doing. And when I'm in a good place in terms of my listening, I'm able to step back and actually not do anything and just widen my ears to take in everything without doing anything about what I'm taking in. Because again, I'm like a doer. So I'm like, okay, these are like the 5 things you can do to solve what's happening here. Like, I'm like, I'm going through that, or I'm like, oh, I'm going to tell this story. It's going to really relate to the. So what I've learned from myself is to step back and instead of trying to, again, fix or it kind of comes back to our boundaries of like just quite simply opening my heart and my ears to what I'm receiving without doing anything about it. So for me, I have to put it in park and be like,
Yeah, you are a great listener, Clara. You are such a great listener. I think for me, it's something really similar too, of like not trying to fix or be like, also same, me too. I also have this experience. But for me, active listening is like is really actually similar. To me, the definitions of holding space and active listening are sort of the same.
Exactly.
It's like I'm in my body, I am breathing for myself, I'm holding a lot of eye contact. That's a really big one. And in terms of studentship, it's like I need to be modeling it. And so I've been in trainings with teachers that are like, open the floor, and then they're like looking at their notes while someone is sharing, or and so I'm super clear that when I step into the seat of the teacher, that all of my actions are being watched, and I want to be embodying what I want to see in my students. And I do that especially with teens too. The sort of caveat to that with teens is that, especially with this generation, they're so wildly amazing at multitasking because they've just grown up touching screens, that sometimes them doodling and listening can be really a nice way for them to stay connected. And so I get a little looser with that generation. Their attention spans are shorter. And so I've pivoted in the way of like how I form sessions and retreats for younger people in terms of attention spans, because it's just different. And not being so assuming that they're not listening. Because sometimes I'm like, oh, no one was really feeling that. And then I'll like run into that person and be like, 5 years ago when I was 14, you told me this. And I'm like, you cared? Like that was at your gym class. Like, or like on your school turf field. So I think that sometimes I get in this place of being in judgment of how other people are listening, and it might look different than me.
Oh, I love that. Thank you for sharing that. I love the perspective of age and also generation as well in terms of activities and what people are able to absorb and identify with.
Yeah, and it's different, and it's not necessarily bad. Like I know that we look at children growing up in this world and we're like, oh, they're this, they're that, but they're brilliant also, and their ability to like see the world and the planet and all these like corrupt structures, like the barometer for truth is so profound. And so obviously that's my heart is for young people. But I am always like, so just learn so much and I'm so blown away. And so I think that, say, Gen X parents raising Gen Z children, and there's this big disconnect. I really encourage parents to just like see and listen more to, they're actually brilliant and absorbing so much. It just looks different than you.
What a great,
thank you so much.
Great way to end this discussion. Yeah, thank you so much for joining. I learned so much. I usually do in these talks, but this was especially
such a gift to have you.
Thank you for having me. And it's like, for me, I don't know what's going on. I just had my birthday, but I'm feeling like wildly nostalgic, and so much of like, I don't know, like I've been on the road for a really long time. My life has been shifting in so many different ways. And for some reason, this like nostalgia is like coming up. And so Claire, when you speak, I feel like I'm like sitting on my mat, like next to you. I was obsessed with Clara, like probably in an unhealthy way, but she used to work with my ex. And one day I was at Nuba and I was in Clara's class in the morning, and I was at Nuba and she like came over and she was like, hey Mike, like, how's it going? And they were chatting and my jaw was like on the floor, and he's like, this is my girlfriend. And I was like, yes, me, my friend of the class. And I was like, bye. And I was like, you know, Clara. I was like so floored. And yeah, and then obviously like I became less of a weird obsessed creep and we became friends, but it's just like always such an honor to be in your presence, Clara, and I just like bow to you as like one of my first teachers that showed a possibility for what my life could be and look like. And I think of you so often, and you're such like a big piece of the work I do in the world. Was the impact you had on me as a young person, and you were that for me, and I love you, and I feel so honored to be here with you.
Oh, Allie, I'm gonna start crying. Yes, and it's been a gift. I said it before, to see you blossom into the amazing being that you are. I've known you since you were 19, and that was a while ago. And just to see, your transformation and you stepping into your power and into your calling, and I'm really happy to share you with our community, because if you don't know Allie, you should. And again, like the work that you're doing with the next generation is so important. And I'm so grateful to you for what you're doing. So thank you for that. And if you want to learn more about Allie, we'll have lots of information everywhere. So you can definitely, Girlvana is everywhere. And so if you have a daughter and or want to, teach to our next generation, she holds trainings all over and probably online at this point. And we'd love to have you back on the show at another time, and also talk. You have so many other projects that I want to talk about. We just don't have enough time to chat. But we'll get there. And Steph always, those good crushed it on the questions, sister.
Woo, those questions. Wow, I was not, normally I do a lot of podcasts and I'm not getting asked those kinds of questions. That was like so rich and like robust. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And so, thank you everybody. And we hope you enjoyed today's podcast, because I sure did. And we'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us today on the podcast. Today's podcast was brought to you by the Practice with Clara app. That's mine. I've created almost 100 yoga classes for you to do at home or on the go. And they're available to you on your favorite device, including mobile, desktop, and TV. These classes include vinyasa, slow flow, hatha, restorative, yin, mantra, meditation, I also just had a baby, so I created prenatal yoga for all 4 trimesters. So head over to clararobertsoss.com/join to learn more. Or search for the Practice with Clara app at your favorite app store. There's a 7-day free trial, so no commitment. And make sure to subscribe to the podcast. We've got lots of good stuff in store for you. Until next time, namaste.